Collins MP for Folkestone Hythe. Thank you very much for speaking to us today, the Media Society. I wanted to speak to you because you're the chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee as well. You've been very busy as of late, all things with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook we'll just go on to in a second. But I have to ask you first in the developments in the House this week with the Data Protection Bill, and importantly one of those amendments which was voted down, which was sort of calling for a Leveson Style 2 inquiry. What do you think of what happened there?
Well, I think the Leveson inquiry that was completed, the idea was there would be a second Leveson inquiry once certain court proceedings had been completed. I think what's happened since then is there have been lots of other investigations, the police investigations and others, and they've concluded a lot of the work that would have been conducted through Leveson 2 has been completed through that. There's then the question of the ongoing role of the Information Commissioner, who's responsible for data breaches. And a lot of the issues at the heart of the Leveson inquiry were around data breaches. And then, just to show how old it was, largely around email intercept and phone hacking, as opposed to scraping of social media profiles and data, which is a debate we seem to be talking about more now. So I think the question is, what's the most appropriate way going forward to investigate data breaches, wrongdoing, and in some cases illegal activity? And that can be done through the police and the Information Commissioner's office. So I think there's a question of whether we need a new public inquiry to do that. But what we're going to do as a select committee is look to interview Sir Brian Leveson, Lord Leveson she's now, to put those questions to him to understand more about his thinking on whether this is needed or not. He advised the government he thought it was, but I think as a parliamentary committee we want to sort of put questions to him about that.
And then what others would say, like Ed Miliband obviously made that very passionate speech, bringing in issues of morality. There's a lot actually in the press talking about how it infringed on their freedom, that they have to pay legal costs even if they won the case. Do you think that as people in Parliament that there is some sort of judgment you have to make as well for the families? And that's what Ed Miliband was talking about, that they had to stand up and believe and follow it through. He's been talking about how he met with Cameron and Clegg and the families, saying that we have to follow through, and now it seems like a betrayal, as they would say.
Yeah, well, there were two things yesterday, and Ed Miliband was speaking about both things. His amendment was mainly around Leveson 2. There was also the question of the commencement of Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act. This is the provision that this is the sort of stick to the press to say, unless you join a recognised press regulator, recognised under the Royal Charter, then you could be in a position where if someone takes you to court because they're unhappy with the treatment you've given them in your newspaper, and even if the newspaper won the case in court, the judge could still award all the costs to the newspaper. There's no other place in English law where something like that could happen, and I think that would be a wrong penalty to impose, particularly when many newspapers and newspaper groups have financial problems, struggling to compete against digital media. And the House of Commons, in the end, that amendment wasn't even put. I think there's a recognition now that this would be the wrong step to take. But also, what's happened since the legislation was passed and the Leveson inquiry took place is the press have set up a body called IPSO, which is their own self-regulatory body with their own code. They've now introduced a compulsory arbitration scheme for anyone who wants to take a complaint against them, have their complaint considered. That's funded by the industry. So the innocent victim of press intrusion, people like Chris Jeffrey in the past, who were for no fault of their own had their lives turned upside down by the wrong insinuation that in his case he'd been involved in a murder case. But they've got an ability to take their complaint to a body where it will be looked at, and they can do that at very low cost. And that was always something that Leveson had wanted to see in press self-regulation in this country. So things have evolved differently than were envisaged when these things were looked at by David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg. And I think we have to respect the fact that the press have created this body IPSO. The press refused to join up to, none of the major newspapers will sign up to a press regulation body under the Royal Charter. They won't do it under principle because the Royal Charter, created by Parliament and that can be amended by the House of Commons, they believe will undermine the principle of the free press and will ultimately give politicians too big a say on the rules that govern how newspapers operate and what they can say and what they can report. So, is everything fine in terms of press standards? Do newspapers make mistakes? No, I think no, not everything is perfect. Newspapers do make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. But we've got to be careful that the response to that is not to create a system of regulation for the press that will stifle the free media and give the politicians too much of a say as to what goes on. With regards to Leveson 2, if any evidence of wrongdoing from the past has not been examined, can be by the police and can be by the Information Commissioner's Office as well. So the question is, what beyond that would a second Leveson inquiry achieve? Lord Leveson has spoken about doing more investigations into fake news and issues around social media and data breaches on social media. Well, again, I'd say we've already got a parliamentary committee investigating that. We've got the Information Commissioner investigating that. The Electoral Commission's investigating that at the moment. So do we need yet another investigation? So things move on, and it's quite a long time now since the original Leveson inquiry happened. And I think the reason the House of Commons has not yet moved to commence a second Leveson inquiry, I think, is in part out of respect for that a lot has happened since the initial one was initiated. But we want to, as a select committee, question Lord Leveson about that. He gave advice to the government. He thought it should happen, and we want to question him about the advice he gave.
You mentioned all those different investigations that could happen in all these different bodies, particularly the select committee that you're the chair of now, and you've been in the media so much talking about recent issues. Where do you see your select committee fitting into that in terms of making an impact? Because obviously you question people most of the time. You sort of ask questions which perhaps wouldn't be asked otherwise. Is that the main role, you think, of that committee in the current climate and how everything has changed?
Well, the committee's got the ability to focus on issues of importance and to gather evidence and question witnesses in a more open way than is normally possible. There are other agencies. There's the Information Commissioner I've mentioned. There's Ofsted, the media regulator, Ofcom, the media regulator. They have their roles too, but I think what the committees can provide is a public forum for scrutiny and debate, where we can bring people in from outside of Parliament and question them about what's going on. And that can sometimes, I think, give us very important evidence, very significant evidence. It's also an opportunity for people to come forward with evidence they can present to us, written evidence, questions that we can then put to people in power. I think that the key function I think the select committees play in Parliament now is that whilst the whole House holds government and ministers to account, the select committees can bring in people from outside and hold them to account as well. And in our case, that can include some of the major media companies in the world, as well as individual practitioners.
And talking about who you can call in, you've just sent a formal summons now in the last couple of hours to Alexander Nix, Dominic Cummings, a few other people then from Leave.eu. Tell us a bit more about that, what you're aiming to achieve there, because the whole story of Cambridge Analytica, data breaching, privacy, we've heard of and we've been following. But at this stage right now, what is the purpose of getting these people in for this inquiry investigation you're looking at?
Sure. So with Alexander Nix, he previously gave evidence to the committee. We asked him when he gave evidence whether Cambridge Analytica had acquired Facebook user data from Dr. Alexander Kogan at Cambridge University. He said that they had worked with Dr. Kogan, but it was a project that hadn't really yielded anything, hadn't gone anywhere, and they certainly hadn't acquired Facebook user data from him. Now, I would say looking at the evidence Dr. Kogan has given to the committee, looking at other evidence that's been published, I think it poses very serious questions about Alexander Nix's testimony. We have to consider as a committee whether he misled us. That's quite a serious offence in our eyes, and therefore we want him to come in and answer questions to help us make a decision as to whether Alexander Nix's evidence was as honest as it could have been. So I think that's why it's important he comes in. With Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore from Leave.eu, the reason we've asked them to come in is other people have given evidence against them during the course of the inquiry. So we have to consider in our report what we say about that, and therefore we want to give them the right to reply. In particular, whether there was any question of inappropriate use of data from Eldon Insurance, their insurance companies, whether that was used in the referendum, whether that was correct. Also to get to the bottom of what their working relationship with Cambridge Analytica was. At one point they said they'd hired them, then now said they didn't. Did Cambridge Analytica provide any work in kind for them during the referendum campaign? Was that declared? So we want to put those questions to Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore to understand more about that. With regards to Dominic Cummings, again, we are not looking to investigate the referendum. There are already investigations by other bodies, particularly the Electoral Commission, looking at that. But again, we've received very important evidence about the way in which, about data usage in the campaign, the structure of the Leave campaign and Vote Leave. Dominic Cummings was the director of Vote Leave. He oversaw all of that and their relationships with other campaigns like Believe in particular and Veterans for Britain. We will understand how that worked. Next week we'll be taking evidence from a Canadian company called Aggregate IQ, who were the consultancy they hired, but Dominic was at the heart of that. Now I've just heard that Dominic Cummings has said that he's got no intention of appearing in front of the committee, that he feels that he doesn't have to reply to the summons. Well, all I would say is that the grown-ups in this inquiry recognise that when you're asked by a parliamentary committee to come and give evidence, that actually there's an expectation that you will find a date to do that. We wrote to him some weeks ago. He's proved incredibly difficult to pin down on a date. He suggested coming not until much later in the summer, which we think will be far too late given we're taking other evidence from other people now. We know from the Information Commissioner and the Electoral Commission there's no reason, in their view, why he can't give evidence. He's not been charged with any offence, so the normal sub judice rules that prevent someone who's part of court hearings or legal proceedings from giving evidence don't apply. He's central to a lot of the events that are being discussed. And I think many people will question why is it that in this campaign, in this inquiry so far, Alexander Nix has given evidence previously, Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore are prepared to give evidence, Aggregate IQ will give evidence, but Dominic Cummings won't. I think that's a big mistake on his part, and I hope he'll reconsider.
And stepping back then for a second, looking at what's happened over the last few weeks, I talked about the media coverage and the attention that you've had in that committee. What's it been like then, experiencing specifically this data and Cambridge Analytica? It's recently sort of closed its doors, but there's lots of confusion around it. What's it been like for you as the chair of that committee, working with other members and the environment, the atmosphere? Because it seems day by day, week by week, even now before we sat down, you announced these formal summons. Has it been like that with you in terms of trying to get people in, trying to make sure that you get everything out of that inquiry as well?
Yeah, the inquiry's developed a lot since we started it. And we started off the inquiry, which was looking at fake news and disinformation. We were looking at a quite tight definition of fake news as being sort of known lies. We know the Pope didn't endorse Donald Trump, so you can say that story is clearly fake news. So what's the responsibility of companies like Facebook and Google to act against known sources of fake news, which actually can be harmful to society, particularly during an election campaign? I think as we've gone through the inquiry, I think what has been clear is that there is also another category of news and information which can be equally harmful too, which is not necessarily fake in the pure sense, but is hyper-partisan, misleading, maybe based on a grain or shred of truth. And the issue there is the frequency with which people see that information. They can be bombarded and targeted with that information, and not just not by politicians, political parties, but by bad actors operating maybe in other countries, targeting them that information. They're not often aware of who's sending it to them, or why they're receiving it, and they can often get the misleading impression that this information they're being targeted with reflects what everyone else is thinking and seeing on sites like Facebook as well, when it doesn't necessarily. As you know, with Facebook, the more you consume, the more interest you show in topics, the more you see of them. Facebook is designed to serve up what it thinks you want, and it bases that based on what you interact with. So that for us has become a really major part of the inquiry, to look at that and understand that, which is why the issues of data targeting, the role of consultancy like Cambridge Analytica, how data is acquired to do that targeting in the first place, how much data we give away, not just on Facebook but through interaction with other sites as well, has become a really important part of the inquiry, because what we've seen is the collection of all this data is being applied to political profiles of users and then used to target them in campaigns. So what's interesting, of course, is that that's important to us. It's important understanding how that's worked in elections in this country, but it's important to other countries in the world as well. And one of the most interesting parts of the inquiry has been not just the questioning of global tech companies like Google and Facebook, but also the work we've done with other parliaments as well. So I recently gave evidence to the Canadian House of Commons, who are investigating similar issues. We've developed a good working relationship with the Intelligence Committee in the United States Senate. There was recently a hearing in Singapore which was questioning Facebook based on testimony they're given to us. And we're trying to develop these links with these other parliaments as well, because we all have different jurisdictions, different roles, different interests. But a lot of the information we're gathering is vital to all of us. And it's happening at a live time, a time of change too, because the House of Commons is also been considering the data protection bill, because of, I think, issues that were raised due to the Cambridge Analytica data breach. There have now been further changes made to that bill to give the Information Commissioner more investigatory powers to seize data that's relevant to her investigations, not just to be able to fine companies, be able to take quick action against them. And I think that those changes wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been this sort of public scrutiny. So it's an interesting inquiry, because I think data is such a big issue for society today. It's the In many ways, it's the new oil of the tech economy. These are live issues that we're grappling with. We're finding out more all the time, and it's relevant to inquiries going on elsewhere around the world as well, to which we're connected. So I think it's been a particularly fascinating inquiry, and we're hoping that we'll be able to draw it to a conclusion this summer.
And the big one then, before we draw to a close, is Mark Zuckerberg, trying to get him to testify. He was in front of the US lawmakers, and they were particularly strong in their questioning, if I may say so. And there's some uncertainty that he will go to the European Parliament. I'm not sure he's given any indication that he'll come to the Parliament. Why do you want to speak to him? And do you think that, as well as answering questions, do you think that you can get Zuckerberg to come and speak?
Yeah, we've found all the way along that trying to get answers out of companies like Facebook, or Facebook in particular, is not easy. Much earlier on in this inquiry, we said to Facebook, you've given evidence to the United States Congress about Russian activity in the presidential election, based on your analysis of who was doing what on the platform, and that's discovered that the Russians had bought ads to target American voters in America during the presidential campaign. Can you do a similar study for us to show whether that took place during the Brexit referendum? And initially they refused to do that, and then they eventually did, and that work, which they say they can't guarantee is complete, showed very little evidence of direct Russian involvement intent, but not very much activity. We then had evidence from them where we asked them, so the guy who's their policy lead in the UK and their global policy lead on fake news, a lady called Monica Bickett, we asked them about questions about their relationship with Cambridge Analytica, how vulnerable the user data was to being sort of hacked or scraped or taken by developers, and what could be done with it. All of that was downplayed. There were no straight answers given to any of those questions, and we asked expressly about it. We're then in a situation then when, because of investigative journalism and whistleblowers, it turns out there were links that they never disclosed to us, and they said they didn't disclose to users who were victims of the data breach that occurred. We found that we had more outstanding questions, so we again asked Mark Zuckerberg. We didn't get him, but we got Mike Schroepfer, the Chief Technology Officer at Facebook, one of the most senior people in the company. We put our questions to him about Facebook and how it works and these issues. At the end of that session, I think there were over 40 questions that remained unanswered. So I think with respect to Mike Schroepfer, we were left in a position saying, well, if he can't answer these questions, who can? And ultimately, by his own admission, the man who decides what happens at Menlo Park in California is Mark Zuckerberg. It's his company, and therefore, if other executives, even people as senior as Mike Schroepfer, can't satisfy the committee with their answers, I think we're left with no choice but saying to Mark Zuckerberg and the company, I think the British people deserve to have answers to these questions. They're fundamental not to their data rights, but also to the way our democracy functions in a modern world as well. And we should have the right to question him about it. So I hope he does come. We don't have the power to summon someone who's not a British citizen or living in the UK, but we have said that if he refuses to come, the next time he's in the UK, we would look to sort of serve a summons on him, requesting that he comes.
David Collins, thank you.
Thank you very much.